Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believe in a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do,
yes, keep breathing. That's very important. From the City of Angels in Los Angeles and the Big Apple in New York City, welcome to all my listeners out there in Radio Land. I am Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver, at caregiverdave.com, along with my lovely co-host, Adrienne Gruberg, at thecaregiverspace.org, coming to you live and on demand 24/7 on 21 global audio and video platforms, including, I'm sorry, I got to name them, iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, SoundCloud, HealthyLife.net, Vimeo, Stitcher Radio, Blog Talk Radio, Mixcloud, Listen Notes, Blueberry, Player FM, Podcast.com, VIP Internet Radio, TuneIn.com, Facebook Live, Owl's Tale, Ubook, Castbox, sorry about that, and of course, CaregiverDave.com, and we are so proud to be voted #1 caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM, as well as one of the top 6 best podcasts by Caring.com, as well as #3 podcast out of thousands on Caregiver Podcasts on FeedSpot. And we have an exciting show planned for you today, don't we, Adrienne?
Of course we do.
That's her big line. She never messes up. Today we have Reverend Patricia Cagganello. I should have asked how to pronounce that, but I think I did a pretty good job. And she is CEO and founder of Sacred Stories Media, a conscious online media network. And as an ordained interfaith, interspiritual minister, Patricia believes every story is a sacred story. She's ordained from One Spirit Interfaith Seminary in New York. But before we get started, I want to thank last week's guest, Ann Weisbrod, Director of Social Services at the Hebrew Home at Riverdale, who has over 30 years' experience as a social worker. And just a reminder, you can watch or listen to that interview and all our interviews on our membership website, caregiverdave.com, or any of the other 21 global platforms that I mentioned earlier, like iHeartRadio, YouTube, and iTunes, etc. All right, enough of that. Welcome to the show, Reverend Patricia. I'll just call you Patricia, if that's okay. And I'm so excited to have you on. Why don't you take a minute to and introduce yourself? I like to ask guests, just who is Patricia Cagganello, and why were you put on this earth? How's that?
Well, that is quite the intro question. Thank you so much. No, I'm just so delighted to be here. This is kind of our first conversation, and I love both of you guys already. This is no, it's good. It's just a great energy, and I'm just so delighted. So yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You complete us also.
So I'm an ordained interfaith interspiritual minister. Sacred Stories Media is my online media company, but what that contains is Sacred Stories Publishing. And the reason and why I'm excited to talk today, among all the other reasons, is because we have a really amazing book out that is actually fascinating that people have already started saying to us, this is such a great book for people who are going through difficult times, people who are caring for people going through difficult times. The book is called Chaos to Clarity. So why am I on this earth? I guess short, at 58, what I've come to the conclusion today that I can share with you is I believe that I'm truly a sacred storyteller, and I'm here to share stories, help others share stories to hopefully bring more of a consciousness to our actions and to our world.
Yes, is that an Italian name you have?
Cagganello, yes, it is Italian. Absolutely.
Cagganello. I can tell Italians. I'm almost Italian. I'm Syrian. In New York, everybody has their own neighborhood. You know, there was a Syrian neighborhood, the Italian neighborhood, the Jewish neighborhood. And why don't you tell us a couple of your stories? Let's start out with some of the people in chaos who focused on others in need so that caregivers can find their own clarity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so Chaos to Clarity is actually a book that shares stories. We kind of put a call out to people to say, send us your stories of significant change. It's always said, hero and heroine's journey. Tell us what happened, tell us the journey, and tell us a positive outcome or perspective. And we received, what we included was stories from 30 people from around the world, as far away as Japan, South Africa, quite a few from Europe, Canada, United States, and who shared their stories. And the stories range from abuse, addiction, abduction of children, loss of children, loss of love, finding love, battling life-threatening illnesses, and winning, losing parents, pretty much the human experience. You know, what we really found when we collected all of these stories was we felt that we had really found the heart of what we call our shared humanity and these experiences. And so some of the bigger stories that are kind of related to the caregivers, and that I think can help the caregivers, were the ones when the people were really dealing with aging parents, addictive relationships, even a relationship where a woman, she says she sold her soul for a wedding band. You know, the day she was married, she was looking into the eyes of her groom, and she saw he was high as a kite, and she knew then she should have ran, and she was afraid to leave the church because she was looking around and she didn't want to disappoint anyone. She didn't want to disappoint her father and her former mother-in-law. And she got married. She said, I do, and her heart just fell to the ground, and it went downhill from there. And it took years, and his drug and alcohol addiction turned into physical, emotional, mental abuse. Her child was affected, and it wasn't until she was able to find support through Al-Anon and really find the courage to finally leave the relationship to save herself and her child, could she break through. But it took years. It took when she said that she finally realized that that her life could not be without consequence. It was everything was inconsequential that had to do with her to that point. And she realized she had to have value. There had to be a reason she was there. And that's how she reached out. She found support from other people who were going through similar situations, which I think is a caregiver's journey. And she was able to kind of break free. So we have stories that kind of run the gamut, but that's one of the powerful ones, I think, too.
Wow.
Interesting that she had her eyes wide open at the altar and they still had a child.
Yes. Well, it is
Wow.
because, right. Well, it's very interesting, right? Well, she did. She had her eyes wide open, and I don't know that she really, I think she was afraid. I think she was afraid of what will people think, what will happen, and did it in spite of, herself. And she suffered for years.
Oof.
Yeah.
The moving story.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you're based in New York, One Spirit Interfaith Seminary in New York. Oh, that's where you went to seminary.
That's where I went to seminary, One Spirit. It's an interfaith, interspiritual seminary school. So it was a 2-year program. And that was actually part of my journey, when I turned 50, really, everyone has their life events, right? And I had a life event that kind of turned me around, upside down, universe shook me by my shoulders, and I made a lot of major life changes. And one of them was I was seeking deeper answers. I think what happens, that many people can relate to, is we have these significant events in our life. That's why I think the book Chaos to Clarity is so powerful, because life happens, change happens, and I even write on the spirituality of change in the book. And what I've learned through my process is that, for me, the spirituality of change is really, when we get our attention, when the universe gets our attention, when we feel emotion deeply enough, something stops us in our tracks. That could be an illness. It could be the loss of a loved one. It could be an abusive relationship. It could be all of these kind of things that we can't just kind of do life any longer. It has our attention, and then we have an opportunity to make a choice. And we have choices. And for me and for a lot of people, what seems to be happening is, we're seeking those deeper answers, and that's really more of a spiritual opening to a great degree, right? It was for me, and that sent me to seminary to kind of say, what the heck's happening?
Wow.
I got to understand this.
Yes.
Yeah.
What, as a minister, what are your duties? I mean, is that the right word? What do you do as a minister? What is your job description? Let me put it that way.
Well, I'm not a
Adrienne laughing at
congregational.
me.
She is.
Job description.
Well, everybody has
right?
a job
I
description,
think that's
right?
life.
It's a fair question.
Well, I'm not a congregational minister. Actually, some of my seminary brothers and sisters are congregational ministers. Some have gone into counseling. For me, it is really about, it was a period of study that I wanted to do because, again, I mean, I was raised, you mentioned being Italian, I'm that good Italian girl from the Northeast, raised Roman Catholic, and always had a very deep faith. But when life kind of hit me upside my head and, like I said, spun me around, I found that I really needed deeper answers, that my faith didn't have enough of the answers for me, in the sense of it was really about my sense of self-worth, my value, understanding why the pain felt so deep, and so for me it was seeking answers. And so seminary was, I wanted to I'm a student, I'm always a student, so I found that looking for deeper spiritual answers was the place that I wanted to start. So for me, seminary has always been about study, and I've kind of taken my ministry, the way my ministry has evolved has been, I've married people and I've done some of those traditional roles, but it's really about it turned into the publishing of books. It turned into, actually, I have my own podcast and so forth too. It turned into actually sharing what I believe are important teaching stories, people with the world, helping people tell their stories in a conscious way. So my duties that I've written, my own duties, is basically that. It's holding a higher consciousness and bringing a higher consciousness, a very expansive, many paths lead to the mountaintop, and opportunities for others to share as well.
All right.
Titled up my book?
That is now on Dave's The Caregiver Caregiver now, so you can go ahead and share that.
Perfect.
Now.
Yes.
What were you going to say about your book?
I wanted to hold it up because this is
nice
Chaos of
cover.
Clarity, Sacred. Thank you. Sacred Stories of Transformational Change.
Butterfly.
This is, it was transformation. And actually, well, Dr. Bernie Siegel, you may be familiar with, he's written the foreword. He actually wrote like a 14-page foreword. He had a lot to say on loss, gain, and change. He's like, who writes a 14-page foreword? But there's a lot to say, right? This is, an example of what I would say my ministry is bringing, opportunities to bring, the sacred stories, bring inspiration, hope, connection. This book is a book of connection and a book of inspiration. And so for me, that's how my ministry has unfolded, is in that way.
That's cool. So let's get into some of those stories. Why don't you come up with one of your most inspirational stories that you have come across as a minister?
Absolutely. Well, I'll share a couple, more from the book, because I think these are just incredible.
Yes.
So we shared the story of the woman who was in the abusive relationship. We also have a story in here of a few different people who was battling a life-threatening illness. We have a couple women. One of the women, her story is called 2 Words, and her 2 words was speculated margins. And speculated margins was, I guess what they said was her form of breast cancer. And this woman, she lost her mother when she was a teenager to breast cancer. And so she pretty much lived her whole life afraid, in fear of hearing those words, and they really kind of overshadowed her world until she was in her turning 50. And she heard the words, the two words, spiculated margins. And she was, she actually was diagnosed around this, at the same time that her mother died, the age that her mother had died, she was diagnosed.
Wow.
But what she goes on to say, she fought the breast cancer battle, right? And she survived. And she said that her worst fear actually liberated her because what she was fearing most finally happened, and not that she was happy it happened, but it kind of took that specter of fear away from her life, and her whole life opened up after that. Like, she's not afraid of anything any longer because she's like, my biggest fear happened and I survived. And her story is one of inspiration. Another woman, again, battling breast cancer. She writes, hers is really funny because she talks about dating after cancer, and she talks about the squirrel she'd wear on her head, and she talks about, being in the online dating world and having to share that you're a breast cancer survivor because he wants to know why her hair's so short, and all of those kind of the journey of kind of reclaiming her own sense of self and keeping her humor through it. She actually wrote a book called Get Your Rack Back, and she started her own foundation. Yeah, it is. She's phenomenal. She started her own foundation, Get Your Rack Back, and she has been helping not only cancer survivors, but families of cancer survivors and their caregivers and stuff for a number of years, supporting them because she knows, what's happened. And I think that's a really important part. That's something that's happened that we realize that's happened in this book. Is that so many of the people, when they were having their most difficult challenges, in addition to moving through, they survived mainly because they reached out and connected with someone, right? Whether it was a caregiver or another individual. But then they went on to help others. Many people in this book have started their own foundations. One of the women, she lost her husband in a car accident unexpectedly, and she talked about how she considered suicide for like 2 years. The only reason she didn't commit suicide, she was that devastated, was because she had 2 young daughters she was raising. But she went on, she actually started her own internet radio network. She has a very large radio network now, and she goes on to help others, and all of her shows are inspirational shows and in support of, helping others through their difficult times. And I think that's why, this book is so special, not only to me, but we're getting such phenomenal feedback on it, is because that's really the energy in this book. It's not life sucks and then you die. It's like, wow, like life happens, change happens, life happens, and there's some really big things that happen, but this is like an outstretched hand. This is like, there's help out there, there's support, and even if it's just in the reading of another person's story, to know that you're not alone, to know that somebody else has gone through it and was able to get through it, can help people get through it as well.
Yeah. On your first story there, my mind went to the book of Job in the Bible, where his famous line is, "Oh my gosh, what I have feared has come upon me," But during Job's trials and his hellish experience, he was rewarded with, a new family and riches again and this and that. So, I can certainly speak to that as well. I lost my life savings in the 2008 meltdown, and now I'm in better shape than I was before that. God has a way of just rebuilding. And then you mentioned something about the breast cancer and dating. And I know it's very, very difficult for women to do that again because, so much of the world's identity of a woman are their breasts, and you take that away, and you better have a good self-image, and not be...
good sense of humor, right?
Yeah, good sense of humor. Now you're a flat-chested girl like you used to be, and many women have to embrace that and accept that new normal before they can go out and do things like that, like dating and what have you.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Just a couple points on that. So it's interesting because I know actually one of my cousins just has gone through breast cancer, and I think there's a new law that they have to perform reconstructive surgery if you have to have, and whether you can afford it or not. So I think that's a good thing if, the women, not that it's not traumatic. But what's interesting in the book, Chaos to Clarity, there's a male breast cancer story as well. There's a woman whose teenage son was diagnosed with breast cancer, and through he got the news driving in his car. A very insensitive doctor was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, you have breast cancer. You're going to have a mastectomy." Here's, and he's like, "What?" And he survived. He did survive. He was very lucky, but it went undiagnosed for years. He was showing, since his high school physical, he was showing a lump he had in his breast, and everyone was like, "Oh, you're just growing. You're just growing. You're just growing." It started having discharge when he was getting out of college. So we're talking 5 years of this young man going, it's like something, and nobody was picking it up until finally somebody said, okay, let's run another test, because his mother pushed it. His mother's like, make them do something. This can't be normal. They've started a male breast cancer coalition, and they have, because he said, I don't want any other male to feel alone, to get a breast cancer diagnosis and be alone. And they're really changing the conversation around breast cancer. Their tagline is men have breasts too. And they're saving lives, they're saving lives. And that's another example of, real chaos, right? Real chaos, and moving through it and saying, what can I do to help others? So, this happened to me and others helped me. Now, how can I help others? And they're doing some really phenomenal work as well.
Well, we're going to take a break, and then I want to talk about that point when we get back. But in the meantime, if you haven't gone to Facebook already, you can do that. But we'll be right back, so don't go away.
Our featured speaker is a best-selling author who has written numerous books and articles. He's a speaker, life coach, and host of Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver radio program. He frequently appears on television and radio shows all across the country and has even shared the stage with Suzanne Summers at Harvard. But his most important role is caregiver to his beautiful wife, Charlene, for over 22 years. Please welcome Mr. Dave Nassaney!
I want to share with you a love story. In a couple of weeks, my wife and I will be celebrating 44 years of being together. My wife, Charlene, and I had a fairy tale, storybook, romance, courtship, and marriage for the first 21 years of our lives together. One day, out of nowhere, my wife has a headache, the headache of her life. She suffered a massive stroke, and it left her severely speech-impaired and paralyzed on the right side. And in that moment, our world turned upside down. I got to tell you, the next 2 years was like a living hell. I just didn't know what to do. I felt guilty most of the time. I became a caregiver. I didn't even know what a caregiver was. I was experiencing the same problems that other caregivers experience. If you don't take care of you, I can't take care of her. Well, that's why I wrote the book. Now I can teach other caregivers. I'm living proof that you can thrive as a caregiver. My wife and I travel now all over the world sharing our story. One day, life is going to call upon you to be the captain of your boat. Heck, you might be saving your own life. Thank you. And we're back with Patricia Cagganello. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Kind of, yes.
Say it for
Yes.
me. Cagganello.
Cagganello, yes, that's a little bit more of a pop to it, right?
I didn't have much confidence in my voice, but the second time.
Absolutely.
I had a friend who just had a double mastectomy because the cancer was only in one breast, but she had heard, she'd done a lot of research, she found that the odds are that it could travel to the other breast even if they get it all, and that your risk was twice as great in getting it back if you had breast implants. So she elected not to have the implants because she did not want to go through this again. Have you heard any of that?
So it's interesting. That's pretty much my cousin's story that just had breast cancer, and she had breast implants, but they weren't the kind that were supposed to be the bad ones. She had it in one. She had a double mastectomy. And speaking of a caregiver, so it's really interesting because her husband, who was used to be afraid of needles, was very quickly responsible for giving her medication and helping her with her drains and all of her bandages, and she had to go for a second series of surgery, for the reconstruction. But I think it's really fascinating because from a caregiver perspective, I don't think we're really prepared for it. I mean, maybe if our parents are aging and we're kind of working up to it, or it's a slower process. But in today's world, there's so many situations where many people are just thrown into a caregiver situation, and it's like, oh my God, what do I do? And so my cousin is, same. So he's a, 60-something-year-old male, and he's used to running corporations. He's not good with the one-on-one, and it's just him and his his wife, but he had to step up, and he had to figure it out, and it was a lot. It was a lot on him as well, and in addition to her, of course. But I don't think we think about that.
Now, I think one of the things that really needs to be addressed is when someone's discharged from the hospital, the caregiver who has been thrown into a situation is so frequently neglected and totally unprepared for what they're going to have to do. And I just think that's something that really needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was calling my cousin like, how are you? Are you okay? And he's like, I'm just I'm doing the best I can. He's like, I have to do it. I just have to do it. So, and he did, but I could understand that because I'm pretty squeamish with a lot of those things too. The sight of blood or anything at all. That's not where, my father was very sick for a long time, and my mother was his caregiver, and my sister would assist my mother. And I'd always say, I'm good. I honestly, I mean, I know my strengths, and that's not one of them. And I can't imagine, honestly. I couldn't imagine if I was the one that was hands-on, as a caregiver.
You do what you have to do, and sometimes when you can't even imagine doing it, if there's nobody else, you step up to the bat and you do it, and somehow God helps you, and you say, wow, this isn't me. I'm getting help from somewhere, and that's such a common story, So obviously, what you're telling us is that when change happens, it's not just bad. It can turn into good, and that's the Bible again. All things work together for good. Why don't you tell us, why do you think that is the case? Why is it that change, is not actually bad, but it actually can be good for you, especially if you're caring for a loved one? What is it about the whole process of change that makes somebody able to turn it around?
Yeah.
Hope when there is no hope.
When there's I know, right? Isn't that crazy? Well, I think the first thing with change, which makes it a good thing, is that it gets our attention, right? A lot of times we just kind of do life, don't we? We do life, everything's fine, we're kind of doing our thing. And how many people say, due to a situation or a crisis or an illness or something, did they actually start showing up very differently, valuing life, valuing their relationships? I mean, not that I would say that we should wish an illness on anyone, but how many times do you hear somebody say, that was the best thing that ever happened to me? Because it just kind of gets the wake-up call. And it gets your attention, right? It gets your attention. It stops you from just doing life, and it forces you right upside your head, right? But that's what happened to me. Yeah, same thing. I was like, whoa, I have to pay attention because the emotion, right? When the emotion is great enough, it forces you to pay attention. And then you have your choices. You have the ability to say, how do I show up? And to your point, Dave, sometimes you just say, I don't know how I did it, but I was able to do it because you're so present. Everyone talks so much about the power of presence, the power of now. I mean, that's obviously a best-selling book. And I think that's why change, I think because when it can bring you to the present moment, that's why they say it's so interesting. Like the people who are like adrenaline junkies, like why do they do that? Well, they do it because it forces them in the moment. It forces them to be present, and you're never more alive than when you're present. And there's a real gift in that. So change in that way, I think, is really good because it does that. I think the other thing, though, that what I've learned in my process and part of even what's coming out of the book, and I actually write about it in the book, and I actually learned this from my dad, is it's also the perception of change, right? Like how we show up. So many times we could perceive things that obviously take illness out of it or something. Like for me, it was an unexpected divorce, life change, it was a relationship change. And those can be, I think, to be quite honest, I think sometimes divorce can be more devastating than some other things because in addition to the loss, there could be a sense of betrayal and many other things that are also embedded in there emotionally. But it's a perception of change. So like my father used to always say, what's the plan, Stan? Right? So, right? And I mean, so I would always say it to my kids, I'll text it to them or do something like, what's the plan, Stan? Because it's kind of a lighthearted way instead of saying, where are you? What are you doing? What time will you be home? What do you know? And all these questions. And it just kind of lets you show up a little bit differently, lets you look at the situation a little bit differently. So even in my situation, a few years ago, I took the proverbial leap off the cliff, left my career, joined seminary, didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I had to do things differently because life as it was different and it wasn't working anymore. And I said to myself, I finally asked that question, what am I going to do the rest of my life and how am I going to support myself? Because now, I left my career. And I was like, oh my God. And I have two kids staring down college, right? So I'm, as a parent, you're a caregiver in a lot of ways, right? You're caring for your children. And I was like, oh my God, like, what the hell did I just say? And why did I ask it like that? Like, what was embedded in that was so much fear, so much of that somehow I was going to be worse off than I was, right? That it was that whatever change I was experiencing was going to, somehow diminish my quality of life or something like that. And isn't that very true? A lot of times when we're experiencing things, we look at it from a perspective of somehow we're losing something instead of, that we could be better off or we could be gaining something. So I offer that a lot of that is embedded in how we ask the question, how we perceive the change. So if I wanted to say, what am I going to do with the rest of my life and how am I going to support myself? More than likely, I'm going to have a fear-based answer that's going to not feel very good, right? But if I could say kind of like, what's the plan, Stan? Honestly, I'm not kidding, and that's what I did. Like, what's the plan, Stan? I mean, take the pressure off, right? Let's just back it up a little bit and let's not assume it's going to be worse. Let's allow ourselves a little space. And to your point, Dave, and kind of see how God or the universe, however we define it, wants to step in and give us a hand and how we can, co-create something even better than where we currently are.
All right, well, let me ask you, what's the plan, Stan? What are the top 3 ways that caregivers can successfully navigate unwanted or unexpected change? Because with a caregiver, all change is unexpected and unwanted.
Yeah. Well, I would say, the first thing would be what we've been talking about. It really would be to look for support, right? To ask for support, not to try to just do it by yourself. I know for me in my situation, when I realized that others were experiencing things similar to me, when I realized that I wasn't alone in what I was going through, I could breathe again. It just kind of puts a whole different perspective on it. So I'd say number one, to your point, Adrienne, caregivers, give yourself the oxygen mask first, right? You have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of anyone else, right? And regardless of, I think, the situation. So even if we have to do it, we might not have to do it alone, right? I would say that would be the first thing. The second thing would be the same thing, the perception of the change or the perception of the situation. And I'm not suggesting that every situation is rainbows and unicorns. Even in our book, we have people that had their children die. We had people that had their children abducted. We had people who lost their parents. There's some really very real things that happen that you don't want to happen, right? But in their perception of moving through it and in opening up what they received in perspective and love and experiences that have come through, it's not that they're going to turn around and say, well, I still wish that necessarily happened, but they can look back and they see so many of the gifts, and many of those gifts have come from connections and people and experiences that they may never have had, without having to go through the change.
Yeah.
Right? I also think a big part of it, for me, was acceptance. And how, okay, this is what is. Now, how do I make the best of it? I can't change the diagnosis. That diagnosis is there. So finding the best doctors and or finding a new job or changing your career, whatever it is in whichever situation. Because I was divorced too, and then I was widowed, caregiving, all sorts of situations in the relationship, not just the cancer. But I accepted it. This is what is for now, and this is how I'm going to handle it.
Mm-hmm. It's in those moments too, right? Isn't it, Adrienne? It's in those moments that there's so much life in moments, in the presence that you're living. I just speak about my dad again. He suffered greatly for years, and my mother was his main caregiver. But there were moments in there, among everything else that was happening, that their love and their connection was so strong and so powerful, and so where they wouldn't even trade what was happening because of what was coming from that deeper connection. When you talk about, sometimes you just have to show up and do it, but there's such a power and such a presence in that. And that's a gift. There's a gift in that as well. So I think the third thing that I would say in answer to your question is that it's being as present as possible for every moment that, that you're in the situation of being the caregiver, because there's some real life in there as well.
That part of it also taught me a lot of my strengths that I didn't know I had. Being present and having to deal with the situation as it showed up. I was challenged, and yes, it was life-affirming.
There was a dementia and Alzheimer's book written about moments. I think the title of it was Moments, where especially for a patient with dementia and memory loss, you have to celebrate those moments. You have to look for those moments. Sometimes you have to make those moments. Put on headphones, put on, music of their time, the 30s or the 40s, for example, and you'll see them come back, or pull out a photo album and you'll see them laugh and giggle about the story behind that picture. Right. And they'll have a moment and you'll share with them. It may only last 30 seconds and then it's gone. But they're still feeling warm and fuzzy and good because of that moment. They don't even know why they're feeling good, but the moment, it never leaves them, or it eventually leaves them, but it stays with them for a while.
Well, I think, people say you can live lifetimes in moments. You know what I mean? I think that's very true. The song It's true, though. I mean, if you think about it, the quality, if you think about the quality of the moments, instead of doing life, right, and just turning around and going, where did my life go, and what did I do, and what was meaningful? There's such a power and a meaning when you're in a caregiver situation, or you're in a situation where change is happening, and you have to show up and figure it out, and hopefully move into a better place, through it.
And if you do live in those moments, that's what makes memories. I mean, a song will come on the radio, and you'll have that moment when you had that first kiss with your girlfriend when you were 13 years old or 17 or whatever age you were. And those moments are permanently recorded in your subconscious. And, when you're older, sometimes that's all you have is those memory moments,
It's interesting. I'll tell you, well, there's a story in our book, and it was a woman, and it was 8 years ago that she got the call that her daughter had died, and it was the first time she could tell the story. Her daughter was 38, she was grown, but she wasn't expecting to get that call, and it was unexpected. No. And it was the first time that she's told her story, that she's written her story. She was able to, because the pain was so great. But we have like pull-out quotes from all the different stories, and one of her pull-out quotes from this was, "Mind your moments because they become your memories." And and part of her story was, because the death was unexpected, she wasn't minding her moments with her daughter. She was they didn't live in the same town. She didn't feel that some of the phone conversations had gone well, or she really had a lot of angst and regret and worry about, did I fully honor, does she know how much I loved her? Does she know that I valued the phone calls? Does she know that even when I give her a hard time, I appreciated, our conversations and our relationship? When the daughter died unexpectedly, she didn't have that opportunity, to go through even that process. That I think, caregivers, if it's a situation where there's an illness, there's a process to it, right?
Yes.
And her message was, he says, "Do I have regrets?" She's like, "I have volumes of regrets." And she had to live through the regrets, and her message is, mind your moments because they become your memories. And so not that I'm suggesting that, one thing, wish anything on anybody, but I even have a friend who was saying her father died in a car accident on his way to work, and she always was like, I think it's worse. I think it's worse. I never got to say goodbye. I never had a moment. I never had anything with my dad that we could go through that process. So again, I'm not suggesting that caregivers, it's an easy ride, or that's maybe what your choice would be. But if you're in there, there's lifetimes in those moments that you can now share.
Well, we're going to take another break, so we will be right back, so please don't go away. Dave Nassaney, the Caregiver's Caregiver, has just released his 6th book entitled It's My Life Too. Reclaim your caregiver sanity by learning when to say yes and when to say no. It was specifically written for caregivers who know they should be putting their needs first, but just don't know how. Dave is the sole caregiver to his wife, Charlene, since 1996. He knows firsthand what caregivers are going through, because he is one. And he now speaks all across the country, offering caregivers his incredible caregiver support package. Even the airlines tell us that in the event of an emergency, to put your oxygen mask on first, before you help your child with their mask. They know that those who don't heed their advice often black out, thus becoming unable to help either themselves or their child. And caregivers are exactly the same way. It's My Life Too. Reclaim your caregiver sanity by learning when to say yes and when to say no. Will help caregivers who are neglecting their sleep, diet, and social life, and learn to put their needs first. Pick up your copy today, or buy one for your special caregiver. On sale everywhere, and at caregiverscaregiver.com. And we're back with Patricia Cagganello and Adrienne Gruberg. So I've got 3 things left to ask you as we wind this down, because time is going so fast here. Let's talk about your co-writer, because I didn't even know if she was going to be on the show, but tell us who she is and how she contributes.
Yeah, absolutely. So the co-author of the book is Kathleen O'Keefe Cannabis, and Kathleen's background is in psychology, right? So mine is in spirituality, hers is in psychology, and she's an award-winning author. And her story is around her dreams, her precognitive dreams. One of the stories she shares actually is her breast cancer. She's a 3-time breast cancer survivor, and not a caregiver, but a survivor. And her dreams diagnosed her breast cancer. Even after her mammogram was clean and all the tests and the doctors were like, you're fine, she was having these very, very vivid dreams, actually like hooded Franciscan monk dreams, that said, we're pointing out and saying, go back, like, no, like, you're not well, and this has to be taken care of. And it was a battle for her to get the attention. And it came back 3 times. I mean, she's, now seems to be fine, but it came back 3 times. And even the second time, they're like, you're fine. And it was in the other breast. And they were like, you're fine. We told you we got it. Tests are clean. Go home. Like, you're just neurotic. Like, they were like telling her, like, you just have, you're just worrying. And they were really trying to push her off. And she kept having these dreams that were like, no, like, go talk to them. And then they were like, oh, we can't believe what we found. And 3 times, it came back.
Wow.
And so her stories are around that. Yeah, it was very, she actually co-wrote another book with Dr. Larry Burke called Dreams That Can Save Your Life. And it was, and the book is a book of research and of stories of people whose dreams. And I think that, it's interesting you brought up the Bible before. I mean, there's definitely precognitive dream stories in the Bible. I mean, I think that there's many different ways where how we are communicated with, how we receive messages, how we receive support, and even through our subconscious dreams. We do as well. So if Kat was on the show today, she would say, pay attention to your dreams. That is a doorway to the divine.
That's why my friend chose to have her second breast removed when it didn't have any cancer in it, and why she chose not to have any implants. She just did not want to do this again, to maximize it. The other thing is, you talk about change can improve your spiritual transformation. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so for me, again, my situation, I mean, I say, I turned 50, went through an unexpected divorce.
Is that called a midlife crisis, by the way?
Well, it's interesting, right? You're like, probably was, but I thought I was supposed to get like the red convertible. I didn't get the red convertible. Went through menopause. Okay. Well, I went through menopause instead of the red convertible. And was raising 2 teenage daughters going through puberty. There's a reason you should have your children in your 20s, I believe. That just doesn't match up, the menopause and puberty. And, I'm a former Marine Corps sergeant, and I was always the really strong, capable one, and I found myself on my bedroom floor in a heap going, what the hell is happening? Like, it just really affected me. I think we have our triggers. I think there's a lot of things we can do, and sometimes we can be really strong. And then other times, out of left field, I was like, I'm sorry, what's happening? Like, I write about how I feel like I have these scabs, and it just ripped off, and I had these exposed wounds that I didn't even realize how intense they were. And I needed answers. I just started seeking out. And as I said before, I've always been very religious, but that wasn't enough because this was personal now, and so I started reaching out to the angels. I've always been a very big angel person. I went into seminary. I just needed an understanding. I needed support. I needed community. And that had me actually leave so a lot of spiritual experiences started happening. Life, be careful what you ask for, because, you'll get it. And I got it in droves, and it was wonderful. But I left my career to follow my spiritual path. So I took the proverbial leap. So now I'm 50, unemployed, figuring it out in seminary, with 2 kids getting ready to go off to college and going, what the heck's happening? So
you're not unemployed. You're an entrepreneur.
Well, now I'm an entrepreneur. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that somehow I needed to pay attention. There was nothing I couldn't do anything else at that point. I feel like the universe kind of, was waiting, and it gave me little nudges. My father would always call them nudges all along. And then finally they're like, okay, she needs it all at once. Just take her and shake her and turn her upside down because she has to pay attention. So, and I tell the joke, it all happened, in 1 year and then I turned 50, of all things for a woman, that's just that magic number. But the good thing is it happened all in 1 year, I guess, because I think if it stretched out too far, I don't know that I would have, survived it. So my change, happened then, but my life and what's happened since then and the path and what has gone on. Like I say, I'm an ordained interfaith minister. I have a book publishing company. We have a media company. I've traveled to places I never would have traveled before. I know people and have relationships and in connections and, with people from around the world that I never even knew existed. I was the quintessential 50-something soccer mom who was planning dinner parties, and that was great. I enjoyed it. But, life is so multicolored and multifaceted now. And people say, well, would you have still done it? And, I think that the thing that I would say to people is, wouldn't it be great if we could just have these really amazing, multifaceted, multicolored lives that we are just living really almost without abandon, without having to have the rug pulled out from under us and everything shook up. You know what I mean? And I think that maybe, through conversations like this and through books like Chaos to Clarity and through just life and people connecting, that more and more people maybe can choose to kind of open up. But I opened up to my spirituality. I really took this really deep dive into, and my understanding, my connection, I feel, with pretty much all that is, just with the universe and life and people is so much, is so deeper than it was, before.
There's a chapter in my book that kind of talks about that. It's called Wouldn't Change a Thing for $1 Million, but I wouldn't repeat it for $1 billion.
And you know what? And that's perfect, because that's really the heart of it. I think that's what I've never been able to capture. Would I want to relive it? No, but did it all? It's all kind of working out. Yes,
so it worked out.
You got Sinatra's song. You did it your way.
Yep.
In the last 5 minutes or so of the show, I'd like you to read us a little blurb from your book so that we can get a flavor and a feeling, and we can just say, "Oh my God, I want that. I need that."
So it's really
warned you, but I bet you have a favorite passage in there somewhere.
Well, so what's really great, I'll just say, the other part 5 of the book, we have something that's called If I Knew Then What I Know Now, right? And we asked all the authors, because we told them, don't teach, don't preach, just tell us your stories, right? And if they had teaching and preaching, we pulled it out. But then we said, you know what, there's a lot of wisdom learned from these experiences, so just give us a nugget of your wisdom that you learned, that can help people navigate change and move through chaos. And to go along with what you just said, this woman was had her 2 children abducted by her former husband. It took a year until they were reunited. She's in South Africa. He took them to Portugal. And it was only through, it was a very difficult time. And it was only through her kind of coming back to love and forgiveness and forgiving her ex-husband and actually returning to the heart of love, as she talks about, when things really kind of fell into place and she got her children back. He slandered her. He told lies about her. He was horrible. He took them out of the country without her even knowing about it. And what she said, when we said, if I know then what I know now, she said, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't change a thing. I would still have shouted, "Bring it on, universe." My deepest challenges have brought about the greatest soul blossomings. Surrendering to each moment has forged the ability to see the perceived blessings and all that arises from the heart of compassion and the emptiness of the lower mind. Each step reveals a higher path to love until love is all there is. So,
Wow.
yeah. What
Beautiful.
else is there to say than that?
Beautiful. So how can we get a hold of you? How can somebody buy your book? How can they find out more about what you do?
Yeah. So Sacred Stories Publishing is probably the best and easiest way. And then they could find, I hope you don't mind, I'm holding up again. Chaos to Clarity, Sacred Stories of Transformational Change. It's actually brand new, just out a couple weeks, and hit best. Thank you. It's hit bestseller in a couple categories because people are really resonating. People pick up the book and they're like, wow, there's just a real energy to this. And we say that's the heart of our humanity. You're feeling the heart of our humanity. So sacredstoriespublishing.com, and the book is available Amazon, worldwide, wherever books are sold.
Wherever books are sold. So,
yeah.
Adrienne, how do we get a hold of you? And tell us a little what you do.
A little of what I do. I have a website, and I have a Facebook page with 170,000 people on it who share their stories. I believe stories are very important. And there are groups, and people can join the group if they feel they belong to, join several. And I'm a great believer in storytelling and writing, to just get your feelings out and share them. So it's Adrienne at thecaregiverspace.org, and thecaregiverspace.org is the website, and all the social media is attached to that page.
It just occurred to me right now for the first time that your followers are a great source of stories for an interview. I know 99% of them are too shy to come on the radio, but I bet there might be one or two that might be willing to share their story because their story is just so incredible. Why don't you talk to Corey and see if she can talk to some people who would love to be on the show, love to change other people's lives and share their story, because as a caregiver, I thought I was all alone. I thought I was the only one who was going through this crap. And until I went to a caregiver support group, in those days they weren't on the computer because I'm that old. I discovered that I wasn't alone, and that
you were
other
not
people
alone.
feel just like I did. I was surrounded by burned out caregivers, and I says, well, that must be what I am, a burned out caregiver. And I learned if I didn't take care of me, I couldn't take care of my wife. I had to put my oxygen mask on first. And so I challenge you and Corey, your administrator, to see there's some gold nuggets in there that some of them might feel bold enough or might be able to be convinced to come on the show and do that. So that's all I'm going to say about that, like Forrest Gump would say. Thank you so much, Patricia. You have some last words, last nuggets, something you forgot to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, Dave, you and Adrienne, it sounds like you as well. I mean, you are, you're just like the authors in our book, and I just want to acknowledge and commend you. Life happens, you're going through a change. It's been difficult, but look what you've done with it. Look at this beautiful show. Look at all that you're bringing and all the people that you're supporting. That is the heart of our shared humanity. And I just think it's wonderful. And I wish you all the best, and I hope to stay in touch because we have more books coming, and it sounds like both of you have stories to share.
No one is more surprised than me, and I'm sure Adrienne can say that as well. She probably never thought that she'd be doing this, or maybe she did think that she would be doing this, but not during the low points in time. And we would just say to you as well, keep in touch and let us know what you're doing. And remind me again how we contacted each other, how we met. You remember? Was it your publicist?
I think it was probably through the publicist. Yeah, through the publicist.
So you have a publicist.
And I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So until next week, we bid you adieu, and thank you for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.